Hey everybody, this is Khara. I am back on another video with amazing colleagues. I'm very excited to have Liliana and Alex with me today. We're going to talk a little bit more about cultural implications for suicide and suicide assessment, some of that safety need, because this came up in a different presentation and we wanted to fill that gap. So I'll let you guys say hello this morning.
Morning. It's a great honor and privilege to be here again and be able to share with two of my girls, Liliana and Khara. So it's great to be here and talking about a real important issue that has arisen, and we absolutely need to have the discussion and educate our community about some of the how to have these conversations without letting it be a fear-based conversation, but more let's just put it on the table. So thanks for offering the platform, Khara, because it's needed. It's definitely needed.
Absolutely. And so I guess I'm going to start us off by saying that Alex, off video, we were talking about that there's continued fear of just talking about suicide gives people the idea. So can you speak to the work that you're doing currently and what that looks like to take away that myth and normalize the
Yes.
fact that suicide's happening?
So, with my role as a counselor for kids who are involved in criminal justice and delinquent behaviors, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of parents, asking, "Hey, I want to have this conversation with my kid, but I don't want to instill the idea. If they're not thinking about suicide, I don't want to instill the idea of suicide, mainly because if it's not an issue, I don't want to brush over the issue." And now with COVID-19, with school, with not having sports, a lot of the social interaction has been cut back. The kids have been, this is the first time in people's life that they're actually not having any social activity, any social interaction. So this is all fairly new for everyone. And so the parents are starting to notice that kids are more isolated, more withdrawn, but they don't know how to have the conversation because they're scared that they're going to steal the idea. If it's not a problem, I don't want to cause a problem, but it is a concern. How do I address it? And so I let them know this isn't a conversation that goes through kids. This is talking about puberty. It's going to happen. We're going to have this conversation. Let's have this conversation. It's uncomfortable, but it's needed. And I think it's we can't allow the fear to control or paralyze our parenting. We cannot allow the fear to paralyze the much needed conversation. We need to address it. And Liliana has a good statement that I've been using: lean into the discomfort. Let's lean into it. Let's call it for what it is. And I think that's really what it empowers the parent, and it builds a sense of connection, like, oh, I can actually have this conversation with you. And so I always tell the parents, well, what's come up? Well, they're listening to certain music over and over and over again. They have their Apple playlist over and over on this certain amount of music, and it's just sad and depressing. And for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a client, actually was a mid-20-year-old. He said he's concerned because his son likes Linkin Park, and he keeps hearing the song "Crawling in My Skin." These wounds, they will not heal, and they keep going. And he have that song over and over. Like, he's letting you know something's coming up. He's, through music, he's communicating what he's feeling. And so, let's lean into that. Let's have a conversation. Hey, I've been noticing you've been having this song come over and over. Let's have a discussion. What's really coming up? And being able to have those real talk conversations with these kids. And so just I think it's giving the resource and an outlet to parents on how to engage in the conversation.
So part of the conversation then becomes, how do we have these conversations with parents so that we can normalize it? First of all, so we can validate their fears. And then second, how can we normalize these conversations? And then how we don't make assumptions about what their kids are going through, right? So I always tell parents, remember when you were a kid or when you were an adolescent, what kind of music were you listening to? And what is it that your parents thought that you were listening to? What is it that they assume? So think about it. Throughout history, everyone has gone through adolescence, and everyone has gone through a period where they're questioning everything. And that's exactly what adolescent is for, right? In that phase, which we're questioning our identity, what we want, what we don't want, our friends, where do we belong, and so on and so forth. And then we add the aspects of right now a pandemic, which we are depressed, we're anxious because of the answers that we don't have, and not knowing when life will feel normal again. Then we're at home. right? And then we're now 24/7 together, especially if they're doing online.
I know.
So then things just feel intense. And then we're not having that conversations because culturally we're not prepared, or culturally we are not allowed to ask those questions, especially in a culture where religion takes place too, right? So we don't talk about it because it's a sin, or we don't talk about it because if I don't talk about it, as Alex discussed earlier, then it's not happening, even though we're seeing it. So, or I have parents who have mentioned, we don't talk about it because then it's a way of my kid to manipulate me to do what they want them to do, which is not a manipulation. This is a serious issue that we need to name. So I think at any given time, I always normalize with parents, at any given time, all of us have had anxiety and depression. What we need to clarify is what is the level of depression, and then if suicide comes to play, like if we're talking about suicide ideation, then what is it that we're talking about? What is it that we need? Can we listen beyond the words that they're saying? Can we be curious? And then how can I help you as a therapist to normalize this conversation so that when fear comes up, you can even name that for your child, because that's what your child is going through too.
Right. And I just love that both of you are thinking about how do we approach the parents as like the role model to start the conversation. But I also love that Alex just spoke to music, how important this is to youth. Like they're finding certain lyrics that speak to them. You know, Linkin Park made me chuckle because that's something my sister listened to when she'd have a bad day after school. She'd blast it in her room and you knew not to go in and not to talk to her. But it wasn't connected to suicide. And yet I want to name that elephant in the room, which is because the main singer died by suicide. I think parents are even more aware and afraid, right? Of like, oh God, you're subscribing to this person who died by suicide. You're listening to their creation. Right. So this is how this is going to rub off on you somehow. And that's not what it's about. It's connection.
Right.
But I also think that culturally we have to be careful, right? Alex, we both come from a culture that our songs are so powerful and deep cut, and oh my God, if I listen to all my songs from Vicente or Bookies or John X or Lupita D'Alessio, and I'm naming a lot of artists from Mexico, Khara, I would be like, oh, what is going on in here? So, and I think that's why as a parent, I have to go beyond the lyrics. Yes, I have to be cognizant of what my kids are listening to.
Right.
And then the next step is to be curious. Tell me, what is it about this song?
Yeah.
So that I don't jump into like, oh my God, my kid is thinking about suicide.
Right.
Because as you were talking, Alex, about that song, I was like, isn't that a powerful, beautiful song that can talk about trauma, can talk about, like, there's so many things that we can go into that song if we listen to those lyrics. But as a parent, we have to be curious, not to jump into assumptions, because not everything is what it seems to be, right? So, I mean, things to have in mind is there a mental disorder in the family? Has my kid lost friends? Or that they have conflict? Has there been sexual abuse? Are there medical issues? Like, those are things that I have to have in the back of my mind as I am curious and as I'm thinking about specifically suicide ideation. So what's happening is my kid being a victim? Is he a bully? Is he questioning his, sexual orientation? Has anyone died in our family? And so on. Like, those are the things that as therapists, we keep track of.
Right.
And then we add what's happening with the lyrics that you're attracted to, what is happening at home, what are the changes. So we as therapists, of course, are looking at that. And then we as therapists have to have this conversation with parents so that parents who are at home 24/7 per se, because we as therapists see them like a snapshot, 1 hour, maybe once a week, twice if we're lucky, right? So how can I prepare the parent so that they can be supported at home? And how can the parent be curious and have this conversation so they can report back to me to see what's working or not working in the office?
And I want to piggyback. I'm huge, and I think both of you guys know me. I'm huge on active imagination. Huge on active imagination. If the kids are drawing on their arms, if they're drawing on their notepads, if they're listening to certain music, bring it in. Bring it in. Let's have a curious conversation that's going to be a conduit to core issues. Let's talk about it. If I have a kid who's drawing left and right all over his arms, tell me about that. Tell me the story behind that drawing. And why did you put it in that specific part of your body? What do you want to see? What do you want to communicate? What do you want to convey? But do it in a way of curiosity. Tell me more about that. If you can tattoo that, would you tattoo it there, or would it look different? And I think that helps kids not be afraid to express themselves. My body's a canvas. My room is a canvas. My notebook's a canvas of what's really coming through that maybe I don't know how to have a conversation about. But as my parent, I'm afraid, when we're talking about being interdependent and being codependent and then being autonomous, they're going through those stages in their life right now, and they're trying to see how far they can go. Let me see if I can communicate a vulnerable emotion without dad judging me. I want to put something on my arm, and if I get a negative reaction, then I'll know I can't talk about this. And so with the parents' ability to lean into it with curiosity and with openness, I think it really fosters a space.
I love that, right? And especially when they're teenagers, when they're trying to find their own identity, and then culture comes into place. So Latino kids will tell you, I can write or I cannot have tattoos because it's a sin. Like my family tells me that's a no. Or I cannot listen to these conversations, or like everything that they cannot do because the family is so enmeshed. And then it's all about community. What you do is a representation of me. And then they grew up in a country where, no, you do you, like you're an individual, you have to think for yourself. So the mixed messages that they're getting is so confusing as well. So then how can I be me, and how can I have my own identity? And then how can I be loyal to my family? And then can I have these conversations with you, or whom I can have these conversations with? Which ends up happening is they go with friends, or they're searching Google to find out what is it that is happening to me. And unfortunately, what I keep telling parents and kids is that not everything is Google, because anyone can go and put that information there. So I think that as therapists, we have to have conversation with parents and be culturally attuned. What is happening at home? What is your family values? What is your family rituals? Like, tell me, let me be curious about your family so that I can understand how to best help you as the parent, and then my client, which is usually the adolescent or the child. And then how am I going to be a resource for you guys so that I can understand what is happening, and then I can translate that with coping skills.
Yeah, and I think, just for our viewers, they're hearing the word curious a lot because it works, right? Like as therapists, we remain curious because it is not threatening. It's actually allowing people to speak up and be like, oh, you don't have this judgment all over your face. You're not freaking out. You're just being like, tell me more. I don't understand. Educate me. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, they're opening up. And I think parents want that to some degree. They want to know what their kids or teenagers are thinking. And this is a way to do that, is try and be as neutral and curious as possible. I know that sometimes that's a challenge or triggering, but that's why we're a support to the parents as well, to say, like, how can we support you in that conversation to make this effective?
Right.
Yeah.
And then also, I want to address the fact that sometimes part of becoming autonomous is asserting your belief system. I don't subscribe to that. And parents, being open to that reality. I don't subscribe to that anymore. I did subscribe to that, Mom. Like for example, when I was growing up, there was a time where I don't subscribe to that thought process anymore. And my parents hearing that was like, wait, what? It's almost like you're rejecting us. You're rejecting everything about the culture. You're rejecting about our parenting. It's like, no, I really do not subscribe to putting a burning newspaper on my ear to get ear pain away from me. I don't subscribe to that. I don't want to do it. Even though it's been generational, I don't want to do it. And parents take a step back and it's like, wow, this is part of becoming autonomous, having a conversation about what is it that you don't agree with? What is it that makes you feel if in the family, one of the things that I did talk to, especially a kid, and Liliana, I don't know if that's been your experience when there's family gatherings, let's mock and let's do storytelling. Mm-hmm. Let's tell stories about the most embarrassing things that happened to Junior, and let's put him on blast and let's shame him, and let's all as a family laugh at him. And, one of the things the kid said is like, I'm sick and tired of going to family meetings and going to family gatherings because this is what you guys consistently do. I'm the only child. So I'm the only one who gets put on blast. And I'm tired of going to family meetings, and I get depressed and angry because I know what's going to happen. And again, this is a cultural thing where, everybody gets together and let's talk about the most shameful moments and let's put them on blast. Being your only son, I'm always put on blast. Everything I do is put on blast, and it just feels uncomfortable. I just don't want to have that conversation. And the mom's like, so then how are we supposed to talk about you? So it's like, let's have that conversation. And it's very empowering for the kid to be able to have some validation and not go into this depressed, deflated space and just isolate himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think part of that conversation, right, is going back to parents and then learning about the cultural values and the cultural template, right? So I call it template because I always talking to parents and I say, tell me about your template growing up, because I know that that's what they're going to regress when they are stressed. And stress will be such as like, are we going to talk about suicide? Like that scares me, which means that what is it that was allowed for you when you were growing up to talk about and not talk about? Because I know as a parent, that's going to be your template for your child.
Correct.
So, you know, with the example that Alex gave, I always go to parents and I said, well, tell me when you were growing up and you were a teen, how do you felt when they were talking about you and they were laughing at your expense? Just like, oh, it wasn't funny. But, you know, and then they start like defenses start coming up, right? Like, but I'm okay. It was just a joke. I was like, got it. But I want you to go back to when you were a child. Like you always want to bring them back and what did you felt and where in your body you felt that. Okay, chances are your child is feeling that. And chances are your child is having the same experience. So that we want to recreate the same template, or do we want to create a different template that is going to work for you and your child, right? And this is where culturally attuned is really important for us therapists to pay attention to all those things that we're naming right now. Because if we don't, then the child is not going to have a place to go and have these conversations, and is not going to feel validating having these conversations with the family because the family has never had an opportunity to do this differently.
And I want to acknowledge, there's a couple thoughts that are coming up as I hear you guys sharing what's happening with the people you're working with. One of which is that we know that suicidal thought is common, right? Like overall, we've got 10.3 million people who've had suicidal thought. Right? So that's a lot of people. And so it makes me wonder, I'm kind of holding space in my head for the parents. Yeah. How triggering is this? Was this you at some point? Like, is this really scaring you because you have a lived experience that your child doesn't know? That you've gone through a low moment where suicidal thoughts were possible. And so there's that. But I'm also wondering, there was a huge study that was done on our teens here in Colorado. And I'm curious what you both are thinking. The study said, tell us why you're suicidal. Like, here's a survey, indicate for us what's going on. And so I think there were 3,000 teenagers that did this study, and it was in different rural parts of Colorado. I think there were several different school districts that participated, and there were three things that kept showing up. The first of which was pressure, which is what I was thinking of, Liliana, when you were speaking of like this pressure with my family to show up a certain way, to perform a certain way. Perfectionism, which is one of my wheelhouses. And then the third is lack of social connection, which Alex, you spoke to with this pandemic. So I'm seeing you both nod, and I feel like this is continuing to be relevant. The study's been 2 years old now, but I just feel like this is still embodying our teens, and I'm curious if you guys have any other thoughts for our viewers on that.
From my perspective, the pressure piece is huge peer pressure, being accepted, being, you know, one of the common themes that I have with both adults and juveniles is our three worst enemies. Let's talk about our three best friends and our three worst enemies. Our three worst enemies, comparison. When I consistently compare myself to somebody else, I'm putting pressure on myself to be maybe something I'm not, or be something that's not authentic and genuine to me. But I'm doing it because of the second worst enemy. The fact that I make assumptions that if I'm not the way they want me to be, I'm going to be rejected. Yeah. And therefore, I don't want to be rejected. So I better assume if I'm not A, B, or C, I'm going to be rejected. And then I'm going to go into the third worst enemy, which is judgment. I suck. I'm horrible. I'm a failure. The I statements. So the three worst enemies, I always bring it in because they're huge internal pressures, and they are our worst inner critics. It's like, okay, am I comparing? Am I assuming? And am I creating judgments? And am I consistently entertaining and giving them the microphone in my life because they're creating a pressure within myself? Mm-hmm. And then once we start having those discussions, you start realizing, yes, okay, that's me comparing. That's comparison. This is my worst enemy. I'm giving the microphone to my worst enemy. I love these analogies with kids because they get it. It's like, ooh, who are you giving the microphone to? Oh, my comparison. Yeah, let's talk about why you're comparing. Where is this coming from? Who's telling you this? And then we go into like, okay, well, then is that an assumption or is that a fact? Are you making your assumptions fact? No, it's an assumption. Oh, okay. So then it's leaning into judgment. So when, yes, on the peer pressure, most definitely, because of the three worst enemies: comparison, assumptions, and judgments. Definitely.
And then add, right, to that, the pressures that teenagers and even young adults have, or even kids have nowadays, in regards to they have to perform well in school so they can get scholarships. They have to participate in extracurricular activities so they can fit in, right? So they don't have time just to be, because they're constantly being compared to others and they're constantly being judged by others. So therefore, their self-esteem is so low. Therefore, we have higher numbers of anxiety and depression, because kids and teenagers are not allowed to be kids and teenagers. I don't know about you guys, but growing up, I had time to play. I had time to socialize, and it was not directed, it was not prescripted, it was just be. And thank God I grew up with no social media. And there was no 24/7 news or TV, right? It was very limited, which is telling you my age right now. But like I grew up with actually friends enough time. Kids and teenagers don't have the luxury of that anymore. They are actually pressured to be 24/7 on,
Yes.
and that's not realistic. So coming back to the worst enemies, they're constantly living in them because of social media and families and schools and societies telling them what to do, what not to do, what to look like, what not to look like, what to eat, what not to eat, who to listen, what's the beauty standard, what is cool, what is not cool. So kids are not allowed to be, and they're not allowed to think by themselves or for themselves, because they have so much noise around them. So it's chaotic. It's exhausting being a kid and a teenager nowadays.
But yeah, I feel like they have to have it all figured out. I mean, we have 13-year-olds thinking about college. I'm like, but you're 13.
Right. Exactly.
Really? And then we have, parents who are thinking about it as soon as they're born. But yeah, it's that stuff, or even just in how the parents talk about them. When they ask, how's Junior, as Alex, you called them, how's Junior?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they're doing ABC things in sports, and they're, doing this well in AP classes. And it's like, no, I asked, how are they? Not what are they doing?
Exactly.
But this is the culture of America right now. Is like we just like lay out all of our accomplishments for our kids and ourselves, and it's not truly how are you.
Right.
So.
And then when they act up, it's like we don't know why. It's like, well, how would you behave if it's like, yeah, I would want to drink too if I had to fulfill all of these expectations. Like, yeah, that's why they're engaging in this, definitely. So then we notice that the behaviors are symptoms of core issues that need to be dealt as therapists. Here it is. We need to deal with this. So.
Right. So knowing that pressure is the thing that all three of us can agree is really happening for our youth, is there any one last thought each of you have for our audience to say, this is what we think you can do, or here's one last tip or trick? This pressure is probably not going to go away. It's more about how we navigate it.
I would echo again what Liliana taught me. Lean into the discomfort, call it out, normalize it. Let's just have the conversations, but with curiosity, not with judgment, not with assumptions. And I think it's as uncomforting as it is, call it. Hey, we're gonna have an uncomfortable conversation, but I just need to know, what's this about? Let's explore this and just lean into it. The worst thing that's gonna happen is probably gonna get the truth, and that's probably the best thing. Whereas it's gonna even bring the conversation to the table. So I would say definitely encourage the conversation, as uncomfortable as it is.
Yeah, and then I will add with parents and with kids also, which is humanize yourself. When that feeling comes up of being afraid to have a conversation or not know how to name it or say it, verbalize it, I will say, name it. So I'm feeling afraid of having this conversation. And when I think about it, like I can feel the knot in my stomach, and I don't know if I should or how to start it, right? Like name it, humanize yourself as much as you can, because these are hard conversations to have. No one has taught us how to do this. And so normalize as much as you can. My family didn't show me. When I went to school, they didn't show me. As a matter of fact, I just don't know how to do this. So normalize it and humanize yourself, because we're all afraid to have these conversations, yet they need to happen.
Awesome. Thank you both. I think, the last thought I have here is that suicide does not discriminate. And so I think that's why we were passionate about coming onto this video together and saying, like, this isn't just a white person problem. This isn't just a poverty problem, right? Like, there's just all these different dynamics at play that you both named today. And I think that's a question that comes up a lot in the nonprofit part of us, right? Which is, why is this happening? What's going on with our youth? Why is this a big deal? As if suicide was never there before. And I think we both know that that's not true. And so I just want to name that also the research is showing that people of color are experiencing suicidal thoughts and experience. It's unfortunate because I think it's not being talked about, which is why you're both here, right? Like, that's why the data is not showing up as often as with our affluent or white folks when it comes to who's experiencing the thought and who's making the attempt. So I appreciate you both. I really hope that this gives our viewers a chance to think about leaning in, going into that discomfort, being curious, and just saying, you know what, let's just go there, because our teens or our youth are already thinking about it. They're exposed to it through social media. So hopefully we can just make this more compassionate of a conversation for them. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.